What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday. This actually isn't what I wanted to do this week. What I wanted to do was, we'll get there. But the people spoke, and I heard the people, and of course this channel will always be for you, the people. And you guys wanted another comparison, so we're doing it. Before we get there, trying to think if there's anything I need to recap on that happened this week. And I think the only thing, there seemed to be some people on the For Dummies video that were like, you guys acted like Zeta's the best, like that's a thing. Yeah. I mean, because it is a thing. And I don't mean to be snarky, it's just, I've handled almost every third-party combiner, and the only way I know how to describe it, which I say in that video and I say often, is second place is a far way away. It doesn't mean there'll be no competition ever. Very interested to see what Fans Toys is gonna do, and I would imagine that one day Takara would do a Devastator, but who knows. But as of right now, second place is a long way away. Now, let's get into this. Per usual, we're not gonna judge things that we don't normally judge on this channel. If I were to do so, it would get a little wonky. For instance, the instructions for the transform element are kind of so I would have to take off a point for that, but I don't really judge that on my channel, so we're not gonna start judging it now for the sake of giving one or the other an edge. I try to make this as objective as possible, but certain things are just a matter of subjectivity. Sculpt, color choices, etc. Like, there's no way getting around that. We are adding one new category thanks to a viewer who suggested it and put it in the comments, so I'm always watching, I'm always keeping track, and we're gonna add that this time. And with that, let's get started. It's gonna be a long one.
Accessory-wise, I think they both kind of lose points because neither one of them have anything creative or unique to kind of bring to the table. It's just business as usual. They both have the gun. They both have the predictable axe, which is a little overplayed in my opinion as well. And then the Magic Square one has the battle damage pieces as well as the extra helmet, where the Transform Element has a more practical piece, which is the trailer adapter. So Magic Square has more. Transform Element has more useful, you could say. They both have the Matrix gimmick. I think I'm going to say that they score evenly here.
The build and materials on both are solid. The Transform Element uses a simple but straightforward plastic for most of its design, along with interior die-cast skeleton pieces that create a heftier build and feeling when handling. The Magic Square uses a seemingly lighter plastic for the entire structure of the figure. Both utilize translucent pieces for accents. And it should be said, in spite of the difference between materials in regard to choice, that both are built very well and are extremely solid. In terms of hardware, I see them about equally. Both use more soft ratchets than they do hard. Both use hard ratchets in the knees. If I had to give the edge to one, I'd probably give it to Magic Square because the Transform Element has those wide tooth notch ratchets for the hips and shoulders, whereas I believe the Magic Square even has one extra hard ratchet. Yeah. So the Magic Square has a hard ratchet in both the hips and the knees, whereas the Transform Element just has the hard ratchet in the knees. So if I had to give it to one, I'd give it to the Magic Square, but they're pretty equal. Articulation-wise, the head gets up to there, down to there, and the full swivel, as well as the antenna. For the Magic Square, a good range up, a good range down, and the full swivel, as well as the antenna. The Transform Element has a swivel that gets you 90 degrees on both sides, which is more than you will ever need, in spite of some people saying it's limited. Whoever's turning their figures 180 degrees needs more than this review to help them out. But you have no ab crunch whatsoever. The Magic Square waist, you have a full swivel, as well as an ab crunch to a crazy range forward. And you can fake it maybe for a photo back, like if you were to look down on it, but it breaks the sculpt from the front. The Transform Element has a butterfly, but you have to push this button to release it, which then gets you maybe about the same range. Nope, 90 degrees if you rotate the shoulder. You also get the universal joint, but this one, and let's connect, which is this one gets you 90 degrees straight out, and the full swivel on a soft ratchet. Magic Square shoulders come out, allow a butterfly almost to 90 degrees, as well as the full swivel and soft ratchet to just shy of 90 degrees. Bicep swivel, elbow hinge, single hinge that gets you more than 90 degrees. Bicep swivel is just above the elbow for 360 degrees. Elbow single hinge for 90 degrees. You have an additional forearm swivel that is redundant and meaningless. And you get this secondary wonky hinge that's also meaningless. Wrist swivel on the transform element. Fingers on a base pin knuckle at the bottom. The index finger is once again individually articulated. These three are on the same base hinge. This one is on a secondary hinge as well. And then the thumb sits off at a 45-degree angle with a initial hinge at the base of the knuckle and then a secondary hinge as well. Wrist swivel, 360 degrees. Fingers on a base pin knuckle, each one of them individually articulated, and then a second pin knuckle at the secondary knuckle. The thumb is on a ball peg into the palm of the hand with an additional secondary knuckle here on a pinned hinge. The transform element hips get you the full Van Damme and just shy of the full Monty. The Magic Square has the full Van Damme, but far shorter of the full Monty. However, the ratchets are built into the Universals far better. The transform element does not have a thigh swivel, but you can get around it by manipulating the lower legs to act as if there is one. Thigh swivel built around the Universal for the Magic Square. The transform element has a double jointed knee, kind of, where it's this joint here that gets you a little bit more movement for a similar range on a ratchet that doesn't feel as consistent. The Magic Square has a double jointed knee with a hard ratchet and lots of sculpted detail to get you the full range on the knee. The transform element, there's no ankle tilts whatsoever. Everything acts on the toes. There is a slight toe tilt down, a single toe tilt up, which is significant, and an ankle rocker to a nice degree. The Magic Square also doesn't have an ankle tilt, but has a toe tilt down, a toe tilt up that isn't sophisticated as the transform element, but works just as well, and an ankle rocker that gets to a far more range.
So to recap articulation, the transform element does the shoulders, elbow, and hips better, where the Magic Square does the hands, torso, thighs, knees, and ankles better. They both get the head, bicep, and wrist equally. So the Magic Square is a better articulated figure.
Now, you know how I feel about scale. Scale is in the eye of the beholder. However, for me, I personally think Optimus and Megatron should be about the same size as they are here. If one was going to be taller than the other, I would prefer it be Megatron. With the transform element, it is the opposite of that. It's such a minuscule difference, but there is a difference. So for me, I have to give the edge to Magic Square when it comes to scale. I hope this is enough of a comparison in regards to different size Autobots and of course Megatron to make it useful for you. So let's get into sculpt, and we start with talking about proportions. I think they're both proportioned extremely well. One is definitely beefier in regards to style options. The other one is definitely leaner and taller. However, proportionately, they both work very well. And I think their overall sculpt is about equal in terms of quality from the front at first glance. And it really goes for paint and deco as well. One doesn't clearly outshine the other at first glance in regards to aesthetics. Now let's get to the nitty gritty. And let's start with the head sculpt. Now, once again, one of the things that's going to keep repeating is the use of this dull, matte presence of this Magic Square. And in comparison with the TE01, it doesn't have the flash. However, sculpt-wise, I much prefer it. A lot of this is going to come down to opinion, but it's the juts of the side of the helmet that pronounce themselves over the faceplate that make it seem more official. And I don't mean that in terms of name branding. I mean that in terms of what makes the character who he is. Also, the way that the eyes are sculpted in relation to the brim of the helmet make the eye seem more intimidating. It's an old classic artist trick. You draw the lines at an angle between the tip of the diamond of the almond back to make the figure seem more angry, more serious. And in this way, I think the Magic Square has the upper hand. Now, when comparing profiles, I think they're about equal. However, much like the front on view, I think the transform element has the more cartoon accurate. So that's a matter of subjectivity if that is what is important to you. It is not what's important to me. However, TE definitely takes it in that regard. Now, when comparing the chest and torso of these figures, I don't think it's necessary to do it at the quarter turn. I think what's more appropriate, because of the lack of either one of them having gaping holes in the inside of their body is that we just sort of talk about the general sculpt, paint, and once again, the transform element takes a more tune accurate approach. He's much more slender. He's much more sleek. The Magic Square takes a much more beefier approach. Both have translucent windows. Both you can see the matrix through the windshield. Both have the gray underlining underneath the chest. Both have some sort of metallic look for the grille. However, I like the Magic Square has the windshield wipers. However, I'm not sure if that's tune accurate. I'm doubting that it is. They both also have their marker lights painted. However, one is yellow and one is orange. Also, the Magic Square went with a chrome finish over the grille, which I prefer over the silver paint over the transform element. From a side view, I think they're pretty much comparable. Nothing really shouting out either way as to which is better. However, I do prefer the bump out backpack of the Magic Square. Not only do I think this is more cartoon accurate, but it's also cartoon accurate in the sense where it allows for a more beefy looking, more imposing figure. However, that once again comes down to subjectivity. In regard to the arms, I like the over exaggerated smokestacks on the transform element. However, I love the yellow paint and proportions better on the Magic Square. The shorter biceps, longer forearms, longer shoulders, bigger and in more imposing hands. And from the side, I think they're pretty much comparable. However, I still think the beefiness comes through on the Magic Square. When it comes to the hip and pelvic components of this figure, the transform element has the more cartoon accurate color palette, as well as having a well done yellow paint accented assembly on the front panel. I much prefer that over the Magic Square, which uses the translucent plastics. Anytime you give me an option to go paint over plastic, I'm going paint. However, the Magic Square must be noted as being cleaner in the front because it has less panel openings. It doesn't have the gray square sitting smack dab in the center of the pelvis, nor does it have the blue underoos sticking out quite so far from below. The panels where they flip open to allow articulation are also more seamless and cleaner on the Magic Square. This continues through to the side view, but only by further standards, where the Magic Square is far cleaner, far more complete, and far more cohesive. Looking at the thighs, I actually prefer the sculpt work of the transform element over the Magic Square. I think the detailing seems more natural and seems more interesting because oftentimes they go for a bump out as opposed to an indented look. As always, that's going to be a matter of personal preference, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't prefer it. However, I like the beefiness, once again, of the Magic Square. The only counteract to that is that the coloring, much like the hip skirt, stands more true to the cartoon model in the transform element than it does the Magic Square, but that's going to come down to a matter of personal preference. And me, I'm okay with the white. That doesn't bother me. The color palette is not the issue when it comes to me in Ultra G1 cartoon consistency. It's usually a matter of sculpt, and in this regard, I prefer the transform element. And from the side, the same methodology stands true. Whereas I prefer the cleanliness of the Magic Square, I think the transform element is far more interesting and engaging to look at. But in true to form fashion, I like the Magic Square beefiness. So we're back to square one, or Magic Square one. And the legs is where I feel like the Magic Square really takes control. The sculpt of the flaps on the shins are much more defined, much more independent, and much more visually identifiable as separate pieces in regards to the legs. However, some might find the transform element to be more cartoon accurate and charming that way. I do not. The transform element also has the fuel cans, or tanks, should we say, on the side, which I do like. The Magic Square has them as well, but they're not quite as pronounced. However, the Magic Squares are far beefier. Also, the relation of the feet in regard to the ankles. The transform element utilizes that slender piece against the inner parts of the ankles, which are far more obtrusive than the Magic Square. From the side, they're almost equal. I prefer the transform element fuel tanks. However, I prefer not having that sliding bar visible on the Magic Square. The Magic Square also has a ton of extra sculpted detail, which I also prefer. And lastly, as we look at the backs of the figures, I think it's once again a mixed bag. I think the transform element is cleaner. I like the bump out better on the Magic Square. I like the sculpt work on the back of the legs better on the Magic Square, as well as the rear pelvic piece on the Magic Square. However, the transform element works around the gray panels on the arms. The transform element also offers the silver knee pieces that are far more cleaner and far less visible in terms of their engineering in regards to their function than the Magic Square. But the transform element also has screw holes all over the place. And I like the Magic Square brake and turn signals on on the back of the feet showing through on the sculpt. So for the sake of discussion, I'm using this picture of the Optimus Prime for cartoon accuracy. Now looking at this picture and these two figures, the Magic Square head I think is closer to the mark. Also they use a gray for the face as opposed to the white on the transform element. However, I am watching the G1 cartoon, or rewatching it I guess I should say, and there's plenty of times where his face is more white, and there's also plenty of times where his eyes are further apart like they are in the transform element. I don't prefer that, but that's a look that I can tell you is definitely in the cartoon. The transform element also goes with the white, obviously, for the pelvis and thighs, which is far more cartoon accurate, as is the gray toes and the large fuel tanks. The transform element also goes for the straight red forearms. However, I prefer the yellow paint on the Magic Square. So I would say the transform element is more accurate. However, I prefer the Magic Square look. And that continues to my next thing, which is presence. The Magic Square is definitely beefier, while the transform element is taller and leaner. I think the Magic Square has a more sophisticated look, where I think the transform element has a simpler look. That's not a matter of what's better, that's a matter of preference. But for me, I prefer the beefier, sophisticated look. Now let me get my family down for a completely objective opinion. What's your name?
Jaina.
Do you care which one of these is better?
No.
Which one looks better to you?
I don't know, they don't really look great, either of them.
Which one looks better?
I guess this one?
Now pick them up and see which one feels better.
Probably that one also.
Okay. And you're saying this one, for the record, right?
Yes.
Okay. What's your name?
Selena.
Which one do you think looks better?
That one.
Okay, point a little. That one over there? Mm-hmm. And you pick them both up and tell me which one feels better. Why are you so out of breath?
Jaden told me I was in trouble.
Oh.
This one's way heavier.
Which one is?
This one.
Yes, I agree. Do you like that better? Mm-hmm. Okay. What's your name for the record?
Laura.
And you don't care which one of these is better, do you?
Nope.
Which one looks better to you?
That one.
Really? And now pick them both up, and which one feels better to you?
This one.
Okay.
The engineering is actually a trickier conversation than you might imagine. And the reason why I say that is because the Magic Square is much simpler, much more straightforward, and much more intuitive. However, it does lean heavily on the engineering of MP10. The Transform Element one is complex, can be frustrating if you're not doing everything just right, but that's really only for the upper body. The lower body is incredibly new, unique, and imaginative. However, I think for the sake of this discussion, we have to kind of give the edge to Magic Square only because the process is so much more streamlined and easily digestible. I definitely think the alt modes are equally matched. There's things I like about both. Forgive the windshield wipers, obviously. Took the picture before I sorted those out. I like the hard wheel well of the Transform Element, and I can see how people would like it without the gray stripe because it's more cartoon accurate. However, on the Magic Square version, I like the chrome bumper, and I like the chrome smokestacks, and I like the gray around the sides of the truck. The Transform Element has a cleaner back, and it can utilize the MP10 trailer. So there's just too many different pros and cons to each where I have to kind of see them as equal. So honestly, I think these are pretty evenly matched. It's definitely feasible to make the hardware and the scale a tie, and if you do so, the whole figure becomes a tie to one another. But I give Magic Square the win in hardware, articulation, scale, transformation, and presence, and I give Transform Element the win in materials, paint, and accuracy for a total score of 5-3 Magic Square. But like I said, that's really giving an edge to Magic Square based on small nuances. You take away a few of those and they're pretty evenly matched.
So that's kind of how I see it. Now, neither one of them, to be fair, have any real glaring QC issues, so that's nice. They're both great figures. It all depends on what you want. I wish that this one felt like this one. I wish the Magic Square felt like the Transform Element, because the Magic Square is the one that I personally prefer, only because I like my Prime beefier, and I don't like the head sculpt on this one. And that's me, but objectively I can say this, and this. Like, for instance, I give Magic Square the win in transformation, but I actually, even though this is complicated, I enjoy the transformation of the Transform Element more just because it's new, it's fresh, and it's interesting. So, like I said, It's hard to judge these objectively. Sometimes you can't. This is by no means a definitive answer. It's just my objective and subjective opinions blended together for the most unbiased opinion I can give between the two. As always, what I suggest you do is take what I have given you, interpret that to your own order of preference in terms of what matters to you, and then make your decision. It could be that all you care about is cartoon accuracy, so you could just go right down that list, look at it, look at that check, and say, well, that's the one. And it could have lost 9-1. You know, it doesn't matter. It's what's the preference for you. Before we get out of here, I want to give a special shout out to Sentinel Bay Reviews. Check them out on YouTube. They're the ones that sent this to me. And shout out to Lance. Sentinel Bay sold it to Lance and then allowed me to be kind of the mediator between the two and have it stop here. And Lance was in no rush to get it back, so you allowed me to do both videos. So both gentlemen worked towards allowing me to create this content for you to enjoy, so shout out to them. And with that, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.